Welcome to the ParamedicAF show with your hosts, Dan and Michelle. We hope you've come prepared to be challenged, offended, and encouraged. We are here to create a better future for the entire EMS industry. We have changed or omitted names of individuals in order to protect the innocent, the guilty, and the incompetent. We believe that knowledge fuels power, ignorance is not bliss, and nothing will change until we abandon the status quo. This is our design. Welcome to the show. And welcome to the ParamedicAF show. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Michelle.
And we are finally co-located again for a show. We're riding the struggle bus a little bit this morning because we're doing this first thing in the morning instead of later at night. So Michelle's all bundled up. I can see her hand in her head. That's about it. And we're still waiting for the coffee to awaken our ancestors. That hasn't happened yet. So we're very excited by a lot of the interactions and feedback we've gotten through Facebook, not just about the show, but about EMS 2.0 in general. We've definitely been gaining some experience dealing with trolls now, which we knew was going to happen, but it's kind of funny to see them actually pop up. And, you know, a lot of y'all are sarcastic, and I love it. And, you know, we'll post a serious post, and we'll suddenly get this little sarcastic comment, which is actually hilarious. But we've also get some pushback from people who are just miserable keyboard warriors that are probably enraged in their mother's basement at some of the things we're saying, even though there's nothing wrong with it, or they just take things personally.
Or a sexless marriage, I mean. Yeah,
I mean, there's kind of all types. So that's been exciting, but we enjoy it. I enjoy it, you know. If it's actually going to be like a fight, cool, I'm good with it. Like, bring it on. But, you know, our goal isn't to go fight every little battle that comes our way, but to continue to bring you guys some good content and to push for good change in our community, regardless of the naysayers that will always be there. So, anyway, today we want to talk about intentionality. I know that sounds really nerdy and highbrow, like half the stuff we talk about, but there's a point and there's a purpose, and I promise it'll all make sense and actually mean something to you by the time we're done. But you know, when you look at your life and the world around you, there's this cause and effect relationship. Every single thing that happens has a cause, whether that's from inside you or due to things around you. There's always a cause and effect, and sometimes that causality is predictable, but a lot of times there's unexplained factors too. And I think that something that we unfortunately fall prone to in general, not just in as first responders, but we tend to magnify the factors that we can't control in our lives, or that we think we can't control, and say, well, because I think I can't control this, then I'm just not even going to try. So we kind of want to deal with that and how that affects us in EMS and what kind of changes we need to make and becoming more intentional in how we live our lives and how we actually practice medicine. And in doing a little bit of research, I actually was the one who did a little bit of digging this time. Normally, Michelle is the research nerd because she's fucking good at it. But I've got two quotes from an article by Chase Turner that I want her to read to you. It was a 2017 article I found called "A Principle of Intentionality." It's very long, it's very nerdy. We're going to put the link in the show notes. But there's two short quotes from it that I'd like her to read that'll kind of set the tone for what we're talking about.
So the first one reads, "Every intentional act is guided by what is designated as wise by the subject's current active mental model, whether it is the subject's baseline model, such as measured for adequacy against objective wisdom, or a deviation therefrom, such as foolishness, stroke."
We're still waiting for the coffee.
Yes, foolishness that is traceable to distorting influences on the subject's beliefs and desires. Now, he also defines desires as any affect or feeling I think I combined those two words again.
A feeling.
Yes. Affect or feeling, such as urge, mood, or emotion, that influences choices or value judgment.
So that was very wordy, and again, it's something that you should probably sit down and read more in depth yourself. But basically, what he's saying is that in our daily life, every intentional act we make from a baseline set of principles, and we've talked about this in the context of core values and vision and so forth, but just on a day-to-day value, our view of ourself and our view of the world around us creates a belief system that affects all of our actions. And if we want to see a change in ourselves and the community, there needs to be a shift on that desire level, that belief system model, before anything meaningfully can change. So how does this shift in on a desire level affect EMS specifically? Well, unfortunately, we have this kind of noble victimhood identity in EMS. And we've gotten so used to it, we've conditioned ourselves because of, we're constantly complaining about being overworked, underpaid, underappreciated, which is true. That is true, but we have taken those external things happening to us and created an identity around it. And all that does is just perpetuates the frustration, the toxicity in the community. It's our way of resolving the cognitive dissonance of what we think should be happening, how we should be treated versus how we are being treated, what is actually happening. And so rather than, facing that feeling of helplessness or that frustration, we tend to just internalize it and create this victim identity. And I was someone who did this too for many, many, many years, so I'm not shitting on everybody else. Just this is something that is very widespread. And if we're going to make a shift in this culture, we have to change that identity. We have to talk about that narrative. And the way to do that is through intentionality and taking control of our minds and our hearts. We can't control the outside stuff, but we got to start on the inside first.
So, like Daniel said, we have to start with changing at an individual level. We have to forge better habits of how we live and think in order to infuse that into our culture, our EMS culture and environment. But in general, if you're making the changes, the thought process changes, the small habits and everything else, it can be applied to every area in our lives. It truly starts at ground level with all of us. If each of us is making tiny habits, I think we've mentioned it before, even if you're only making a, 0.1% change, daily or weekly or whatever, as long as there's, a forward upward motion, eventually there's going to be huge change amongst like us individually or as an entire system slash culture. Now, once our desires have been shifted, the new identity embodies those new desires and will God, I'm so sorry, word stroke, affect all of our actions. When we have a unified front of people who are all changing our behavior, then we have a chance to change our entire community. Ideally, not just EMS. Like, we would love for all of these habits and things we talk about to be applicable to public service as a whole, to just better our interagency connections, intershift connections, amongst all different public services.
Well, and there's such an interconnectedness with all parts of life. Like we started out talking with how everything in life has a cause and effect, but the process of becoming intentional has a ripple effect on every aspect of your life. If you think of it, in terms of a spider web, one vibration on one end of it is going to be felt on the other. One change on one side of it is going to be felt in the center. So the reason we repeatedly harp on certain things as areas of change is because when you start changing one aspect of your life, it is going to carry over into others. a very popular topic, of course, is personal wellness. What we eat, how we move, how we think, that's really the ground zero for creating intentionality in your life. And because if you're not being intentional with your body, with your mind, then you have nothing with which to exert any kind of influence in the world around you, because you can't even maintain your own health, much less have any, be able to have consistent, healthy interactions with people around you, healthy relationships. Unfortunately, we tend to create these identities of failure. We tell ourselves, well, I'm overweight, I'm weak, I'm dumb. And instead of, we look at it as, okay, well, there's, this fact about me, this truth about me. And yes, we need to be able to objectively look at ourselves and say, hey, I am overweight, but that is not my identity. I may not be super smart on this one particular area of pathophysiology or protocols, whatnot. Okay, those are facts. Those are truths about you, but they are not who you are. And we hear there's also a lot of excuses where people will use their kids as a excuse to not change. Like, well, because I got kids and I can't do this. Abso-fucking-lutely not. Your kids are looking at you for change, and it should be your actual motivation. I mean, I think you can bear witness to this, Michelle, as a single parent going when you were going through medic school. That's a drive. That wasn't an excuse for you.
No, and I mean, that kind of goes back to what we discussed about the intrinsic and extrinsic motivators, which, a few episodes ago we were talking about more related to school, but that's going to be true for, again, any area of life. Your intrinsic motivators, thoughts and processes within yourself. If you, go into a test saying, I am going to fail, that's not necessarily a fact, but if you're identifying as like a failure, then that's probably going to become a reality. Being a single mom, I was on 24-hour shifts, working 24-hour shifts all through paramedic school, and it was horrific. I 0 out of 10 do not recommend. But it's what I had to do. And I mean, in general, like individually, I loved the 24s. I actually, as horrible and stressful as paramedic school was, I enjoyed my program. And I love my kids and being a mom. And I mean, if you don't have to, I wouldn't suggest being a single mom, but some of us have to. Or single dads. I'm not saying one versus the other. But the biggest thing is to not believe those identities. Like, yes, it was a fact that I was a single mom, but I wasn't going to let that fact stop me from doing the best, showing my kids the best. I had a trauma counselor. No, I'm sorry, not a trauma counselor, just a regular counselor that didn't have trauma training years and years and years ago in a different state tell me that my ACEs score, which if you're nerdy and want to look that up, you can. We won't get into that today, but that my trauma, like ACEs score, was so high, he didn't know how to help me because I basically was the exact opposite of what he expected. It's almost like I was so broken I couldn't be broken appropriately, is like kind of how he made me feel. But I didn't let that stop me. I continued working on things, going to school, trying to achieve things. I don't really shy away from this fact, but I was abused as a child. Well, all the way through adulthood, if we're being honest, but that's besides the point. Don't have that victim mentality. Like, I have siblings, and one sibling in particular, he wasn't even in the household as much as I was, and it was a completely different situation. And no, I'm not trauma comparing, but just as an example, like, I know I'm kind of bouncing around, but I swear there's a thought process. Daniel, I feel like there was either a talk or a story or an episode where like two siblings have been raised by an abusive, like alcoholic father, and like one grew up to like not drink and was like complete success, and then the other brother like became an abusive alcoholic, and so that
I know what you're talking about. I know there was a excuse me, there was a meme, I think, at least this is where I'd seen it, and it showed both of them And both of them said their motivation for being the way they were was because of their father.
Yes. So everybody can go through whether it's a bad relationship or a bad call, but your intentionality and how you decide you're going to change and move forward with habits and all the rest of it is going to change. So, like, being raised the way I was and my siblings being raised the way they were very similarly, all three of us ended on different ends of the spectrum in, whether we did or did not do drugs, whether we did or did not go to college or succeed or this and that. So you need to, regardless of the the quote unquote failure facts, what you do with it, you need to not make the failures your identity.
One aspect of this that really bothered me a lot is watching people who will use their kids as an excuse to not be better in life. And no, this isn't a parenting dick measuring contest. Like I don't have any delusions about being on a pedestal as a parent. But what I've come to learn in my adult life is kids are watching. They watch everything you do. They will do what you do, not what you say. And taking care of yourself and making good changes sometimes means that that's going to compromise time with your kids, which is okay. Because, and this is where you need to communicate with them, especially as they get older, and they do not need to be teenagers to understand this. If you show them the causality of life and show them that, hey, I have to invest in doing this. I have to go to the gym. I have to do this workout. I have to go work these extra hours, not because I don't want to spend time with you, but because I want to build a better life for all of us. And sure, does having kids put some restrictions? Absolutely. But you can still find, if you really want to, if your identity is truly one of growth and not one of failure, then you will find a way to do it. You will find a way to progress. So often the issue is not what's available or what's possible, but what you're willing to do.
Well, I mean, our 5-year-old understands that. And depending on what you're doing, involve the kids. If your goal for your household is to start, maybe not like, a full fledged functioning like homestead and farm, but like just a very basic garden. Instead of telling the kids, oh, you can't tear up my garden, you're not going to help me. Well, either teach them how to do the garden together, or let them go play in the dirt, in a completely separate area. If you need to take that hour and a half in the morning to work out, communicate with the kids like, hey, I want to spend time with you, but I can't watch TV or play this game right now. But how about you, talking to the child, like, how about you do squats while, mommy or daddy or, whoever it is, with the child does my workout. It teaches them good habits. I mean, our kids get tickled using the elliptical. Like, what child, normal child is always asking, can I go run on the runny thing? But I mean, I think I've heard it from all three of our
Mm-hmm.
kids. All three of our kids will do that periodically, and I'm just like, you're an odd cookie, but sure.
Well, and don't expect them to do everything you do, but just the process of what you're saying, like involving them, they feel involved. So even if, hey, you know what, if they just want to do 3 squats and be like, hey bro, I'm out, see ya, like, okay, cool, but you still involved them, you still gave them that opportunity.
They felt seen.
Right.
And you're doing everything, again, with intention.
Yes. And it's okay to share these conversations with your kids. I mean, they don't need to be rocket scientists to understand causality in life. And you're actually doing your kids a huge favor by living it out and showing them. Because if you don't, if you just sit there and be like, well, I can't do this because I have to watch you guys. Okay. And if all you're doing is literally just sitting there eating Cheetos and watching TV with them, that's not teaching them good habits. That's teaching them, oh, well, when there's stuff that needs to be done, or there's stressful situations, or when when I have kids, then all I can do is just sit and eat Cheetos and watch TV with them. No, that's not right or fair. That's going to damage them in the long run.
Well, something that I've learned between my childhood and then as I've done research, because I don't want to pass trauma or bad habits on to my children, I want to break those generational issues, is, if you tell the kids, I can't do X, Y, or Z because I'm watching you guys. Now, sure, there's a certain like truth to that. Like, our kids have asked me before, well, mommy, why don't you see friends more, or have a girls' night? Like, our daughter Kaylee, she very specifically asked about girls' night. I'm like, well, I'm with you guys. Like, there are certain girls' night activities, or conversations that are not age appropriate for you guys. So, like, I'll do it another night. That kind of conversation is fine. But if you're constantly telling the kids, I can't do X, Y, or Z because because of you, eventually the kids, especially as they get older, are going to start to feel like, wow, maybe, mommy or daddy or, grandma, whoever, regrets having me or doesn't, like this situation. I'm a hindrance. And we don't want children growing up like that.
Well, and with this, we're talking about the identities of failure that you shouldn't do. Things like I'm overweight, I'm weak, I'm dumb. But it's not just a matter of not doing those things, but what are we replacing it with? And instead, there needs to be this identity of investment. So instead of saying, I'm overweight, you should embrace the identity of, I'm someone who does the things to help me lose weight. And I know that's a little cantankerous, but you fill in the blank, I'm someone who goes to the gym every day. I'm someone who does push-ups every morning. And start beating that into your head. If your identity is, well, I'm weak, then okay, I'm going to do the things that will make me strong. That's my identity. I'm dumb. Well, I'm going to study the things that I'm weak in. And it's a matter of reclaiming that narrative and twisting that story in a good way, and you're taking charge of it because no one else can dictate that for you. If you feel that they do, it's because you're letting them dictate that. You're giving credibility to their words. If someone is continually reinforcing to you, you know, and there's a difference between someone, belittling you and shit talking you and saying, man, you fat as fuck or whatever, but versus someone who says, hey, bro, like, and I think guys respond better to this, and not that's not meant to be a sexist comment. Just I think that in general the male energy, there we go, the masculine energy responds better to that kind of confrontation of saying, hey, bro, you're overweight. Let's go to the gym. Let's fix this. Let's do these things together. That's how guys bond. I don't know if that's really how girls do it. I mean, I guess you can weigh in on that. I don't know how you'd feel if a girlfriend comes up to you and it's like, hey, girl, like, you gotta lose some weight. Let's go hit the gym together. I don't know how that works for y'all.
Um, if I'm being completely blunt, the fact that even when I was the thinnest and fittest of my entire life growing up, and my dad still told me that I was fat, I wouldn't respond well to that. But I don't know if that's, the feminine energy, female to female, or because that's kind of a trigger for me.
Well, not just that. I'm just in general, that kind of confrontation is more what I meant.
I mean, I'm fine with constructive confrontation. Now, no, if, somebody online calls me a whore, I don't take very kindly to that.
Fucking
But,
trolls. The
right,
miserable shits.
which made no sense. But, anyways, I sidestepped. Just nasty confrontation like that isn't gonna go well. But like, if it was somebody that, like, I thought, like, one of my best friends, if she came up and was like, hey, I've gained some weight, I've noticed that you seem to be uncomfortable in your body, like, let's go to the gym together. I think it also depends on wording. At least for me, like, if that makes sense. Like, do I want to be outright called fat? Not necessarily, but it's like, I can tell you're uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable, like, let's do something about that. Like, you and I have those frank conversations plenty of times. So I think it comes back to intentionality and wording. If someone's being hateful and calling you fat, then you're going to take offense to that confrontation. Versus somebody who loves you and is like, hey, let's do something about it. It's like, hey, that's good intention. Like, I'm down for it.
Yeah, and I think that's, well, we could go off on a rabbit trail with that. But at the end of the day, it's you're investing in a process. You're investing in an identity of investment. That's what's crucial.
Well, and investing in the process of gradual improvement is so important. You need to look at the long game and not just the short term. Building up those good habits. In our personal wellness podcast, which, to be completely honest, when looking at the stats, that's one of the lowest listened to podcasts. And I think it's because it's so over talked about. And, maybe some people think that we're just going over the same shit, but there's actually a good bit of mental health and like not exactly mainstream stuff in there. But I'm sorry, I'm sidestepping.
We just need to have the title as "Let's talk about sex," and then when we get in there, it's like, haha, just kidding. We're talking about wellness.
Right? Like change the title or something. But with the long game versus like short term stuff. So like let's just say, for example, I want to change my body composition. I want to fix my eating habits, all the rest of it. It's going to take small, like little steps and habits, which I know I've already mentioned in this podcast. But let's say I change my eating and, I'm going to be doing intermittent fasting and this and that. Well, long term, I want to stick to that because, like, intermittent fasting is more of a lifestyle than a diet. It's not. It's the way and the pattern you eat to get healthy benefits that have a side effect of weight loss. So, in general, I want to get healthier. Well, let's say, sorry if this is TMI, but we're all medical people. Let's say come my time of the month when I'm on my period, I have, iron imbalances, maybe my body is craving something, some kind of comfort food that I wouldn't normally eat, or because I need to take pain medicine, I need something more on my tummy in later hours than what my normal like intermittent fasting is. It's okay to change and, for example, have like weight fluctuations. So like come the time of the month, a lot of women retain more water and have bloating. So maybe if you're watching your weight on the scale, it goes up for a short period of time. But after your cycle, it'll come back down. Don't get too like honed in on these six. I mean, yes, celebrate the successes, but don't perceive like a slight weight gain short term as like a failure to the habit, to the intention of getting healthier and losing weight. Like, does all that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you have to you have to shift your focus to the long game. We tend to stay very focused on surviving this week and making it through the next shift. Just getting to where I can get to sleep. But like,
which is important because
yes.
I'm already looking forward to sleep after shift tonight.
We've only been awake for what, 2.5 hours?
I'm tired. Anyways.
But you need to have that perspective of making the purposeful changes in the short term has a gradually widening effect on the future. So it seems like little changes now, little imperceptible movements, but over time, it builds up to something significant.
What is that quote that you've said before? It's something like, live today like no one else, so in the future you can... Do you know what I'm talking about?
It's a bastardizing of a quote from Dave Ramsey, which is... I can't remember exactly what his original quote was, but it was something... It's the effect of... We're living like no one else today so that we can live like no one else tomorrow.
So basically, commit to those short-term goals, start building those habits and everything, even if it's a slight discomfort today. Like the way Daniel and I's work schedules are right now is, I would not suggest it. It's miserable. There are certain days. I worked a 36 last weekend between different jobs. Daniel's working crazy hours, but we're living today making these small changes. So in the future, we're going to live differently. Now, no, we're not trying to say that like we're living better than anyone or this or that or whatever, but just no, not even close. But just it's a general quote. Live today differently so you can live differently in the future, if that makes sense. So apply it however, whether it's work, personal goals, family, whatever. It's how you're doing things with intention. But now let's talk about it. If you want more on personal wellness and like the mental health, go back and listen to that podcast. But let's kind of move into like your patient care intentionality.
There was there's again another quote, and I don't know where it came from, but it goes to the effect of, when you are under stress, You do not rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training. So, in a patient care context, being intentional means creating good habits, not just reviewing ACLS and practicing mega codes, which you should be doing. Like, I don't, little side note, I don't understand why so many people stress out about running cardiac arrests. Cardiac arrests are the most rehearsed, planned out, straightforward calls pretty much on the planet. I understand traumatic arrests get a little more dicey, but in general, someone's in cardiac arrest, cool, no guesswork, no game, we got this. But that's a digression. I don't necessarily want to go off on a whole tangent about that.
No, I'm not continuing the tangent, but in general, although that's true of medicine, I think, especially depending on, certain providers, like experience, not like experience, like lots of experience running a lot of
Mm-hmm.
cardiac arrest, but like experience with situation. It's not necessarily the medicine that is very rehearsed. There are so many degrees of experience amongst fire, EMS, law enforcement, the patient's family or home life that can cause those calls, which is why I think I reference them so often. Although straightforward, those calls are high stress because there's only so much that you can directly control.
Agreed, but there's still, there's this general air of, okay, like this panic that and I understand it from new providers. If you're a brand new EMT and you've never done this, absolutely, it's weird, it's stressful. You did a CPR class in EMT school, and that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
But but even then, as an EMT, you can gain that level of comfort with it if you're intentional and you practice those mega codes. If you talk with your teammates, like, you can fix that. But at any rate, again, that's a sidestep. The point being that when you're under stress, your performance drops to the level of your training. And I think that we focused so much on the how to's of training that we kind of skip over the mindset with training. Something that I had promised myself all through paramedic school, but especially once I graduated paramedic school, was that every decision I would make would always be in the best interest of the patient. Have I messed up? Absolutely. We've all made mistakes. We've all had fuck ups. But for me, my baseline mentality was, if I'm in a situation where I don't know what to do, I need to go with the solution that has the best likelihood of a positive outcome for the patient. And that's hard to do at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's really hard when you have had no sleep and you're dealing with a lot of drama, maybe some bullshit, whatever the case may be. But you have to have that intentionality and say, okay, I have to stay focused on what's the big picture here. What's the end game? I have to provide quality patient care for this patient regardless of how I feel. And God, I know that's hard. Like, y'all, I'm not sitting here on a pedestal about this either. Like, I struggle with it. And especially because in this job, things get so repetitive. At 2 in the morning, you really just don't want to deal with it. You really want to, are wanting to find a way to get out of having to deal with, ALSing this particular kind of patient or whatever. And I'm not saying you just over ALS everything. No, you don't. You do what's most appropriate for the patient, even if that means just writing it in as a BLS call or allowing that patient to refuse if that is truly what they wish. Whatever the case may be, you do what's in the best interest of the patient. But that mindset of being intentional is incredibly important, and it is important for us to engage on these calls.
Well, and it's really easy to disengage from a call, especially if you have a lot of stuff going on at home, if there's drama at the scene that is, trying to pull your attention, having a negative predisposition, to the patient or the environment. Those of us that are feeling burned out, it can make it very easy to become careless or oblivious to the needs of the patient. So many examples and calls and such come to mind for this, but the biggest thing is being able to compartmentalize in a healthy way. If there's drama going on at home, there when you get that call, whether it's, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, you need to be able to separate from the drama at home, not be texting or on the phone, making those phone calls. Obviously, if your child is sick and stuff, then you can make a call to a supervisor. But I'm talking about like anything in general that's not like, life threatening or something like that. Any just general drama, put it on the back burner to run that call because that patient needs you. You need to disengage from the drama at home. So you're not disengaging from the call because that patient needs you. The drama at the scene. If family members or something are making it difficult to treat the patient, then call law enforcement. There are so many times, there are really nice areas, there are, the less nice areas, and going into calls, it's very easy to slip into a general like predisposition to what the patient's complaint, might be, unresponsive, slow breathing in like a nice neighborhood. You're like, oh, it's not drugs. You know what? There's a lot of drugs freaking everywhere. So don't let like area predispose you to give you like a bias to a patient and not treat them well. Having an unresponsive patient in, a ghetto area of town, automatically assuming it's drugs, check that BGL. It might actually be that the patient is hypoglycemic and, unfortunately they're just poor. Don't let things give you a bias. You have to go in with intentionality of giving patients appropriate care regardless. Now, yes, we know the signs and symptoms of drugs, and you can ask a patient if you use drugs and they're like tweaking out and they're like, no. So you have to find a good balance.
Well, and another area that this affects is how we respond to other providers at scene. So, like, if I'm called out to back up somebody, and, I could be rolling my eyes, I'll be like, oh my goodness, it's this crew again. Like, again, it's one thing if we joke back and forth, I have EMTs who love to look at me and be like, are you having chest pain? They'll say that under their breath as if they were talking to the patient. I'd be like, fuck you. But anyway, but legitimately, if you come into the call predisposed of, oh my God, it's these people, like, this is such bullshit. And at that point, you've completely switched off your patient care brain, if you will, and you've just turned into this negative, like, I can't believe I'm here, this is bullshit, they should have just taken me to the hospital, whatever. That patient could actually need you. And in some cases, they may actually be sick as shit. But if you come with this continual mentality of trying to find every single possible way out of doing your job, when that's where your intentionality is focused, then you need to find a different job. You need to be able to set aside the personal drama with other providers and do your fucking job. Period. I mean, I won't say I don't mean to be rude because that's a lie. But I hear it so often from, not just from where I work, but from other services where EMTs feel helpless because, whenever they call for backup, it could be a sick as shit patient. And they're just like, well, anytime I call for ALS backup, they don't treat it seriously. They give us attitude and they BLS it anyway. Well, and we just had this happen, without mixing names with tails, we had this happen to a friend of ours recently. And no, it doesn't excuse that provider undertreating a patient. But it is still sad that the reason they didn't call for backup was because, well, I never get taken seriously anyway. And shame on you guys. Shame on you, paramedics that do this to your EMTs. It doesn't matter if the call ends up being bullshit anyway. Cool. Still be a decent human being. Still do your job.
Well, I think in this section, everybody, it does not matter where you live, everybody has frequent flyers. And this is the easiest spot where you have to have good intention and try not to let your bias or habit or complacency affect your treatment. We need to maintain good intentionality and not letting that burned out feeling make us careless and oblivious to the patient's needs. Go ahead on the chest pain patient, do a freaking 12 lead because things might change. And if you are so burned out that you just can't do that, then maybe it's time to at least take a break, leave of absence. I'm not saying quit the field, but something needs to change.
Well, and that just is an example of how you program yourself impacts you and your treatment when you don't want to be there, when you're frustrated, when it's stressful. If your default is to treat appropriately, then that's what you're going to do. And treating inappropriately is going to be the absolute gross exception of your career. Because I've had that. I'm not even going to lie. I can count on one hand in 12 years any calls that have even generated a complaint. Like, not even that I did anything wrong, just that generated a complaint, period. But there was one particular time that I did actually inappropriately BLS something, and it came back to bite me in the butt. And when I had, of course, when I found out about it, I was like, oh shit, that was stupid. And the reason I say 2 o'clock in the morning so much, it was literally 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and there was a lot of drama on scene, and I just was over it. I hadn't slept, and I undertreated. I did not treat appropriately. And thankfully, when I had the sit down with, it was supposed to be a sit down with, management and medical director. Medical director was running late, and management just looked at me and said, look, we've never had an issue with you before. This was clearly just a singular lapse in judgment. You've owned up to it. You know what happened. There's no need for remediation. We're going forward.
Well, and that right there is why extreme ownership and accountability is also so important.
Yes, I mean, it's easy for us to be like, well, this was happening and this was happening. And yes, you should explain your reasoning, but you should also be like, hey, you know what? Yeah, that's what I did. That's what I was thinking, but that was wrong and here's why. Mm-hmm. And that's okay and that's good. That actually earns you respect in this job rather than continuing to make excuses. So anyway, so we, when it comes to patient care, the reason intentionality in general is so important is because ultimately it is going to affect the quality of your patient care on a day-by-day basis. When you are at your lowest point, if you have a high standard as your default, that's where you're going to be. Now, another application of intentionality that touches both on our personal lives and professional lives is the concept of time management.
So, a lot of times what you hear is, I don't have enough time. And that can be literal, like if you're on a call with an emergent return, there's only so much one person can do in, 2 minutes to an ER, something like that. But when you say that generally and you're not managing your time appropriately, there are training and intentions that you can do to adjust that. It also depends on personnel. And no, I'm not saying this is like a, toot my own horn thing. I had been called out. This was several months ago to a stroke, and I was able to get in the house, do an assessment, get things. Our scene time was like literally 5 minutes, and we were loading her onto the stretcher. We were actually loading and getting ready to get in the truck when fire got on scene. Per call notes, I didn't know they were coming, but just it was quick and efficient because of intentional training, a preconceived plan. And the transport time from scene to hospital was 7 minutes. Well, in that 7 minutes, I took a full set of vital signs, did a full stroke race, score assessment, got a 12 lead, started an IV, drew stroke labs, and called in report in 7 minutes. That's a fuck ton of stuff running emergent. But it comes back to training. I intentionally trained. We try and tell students all the time, how you practice is how you're going, like how you practice, like study, review, like literally practice skills is how you're going to perform them in the streets. So if you do things systematically, it's going to help you manage your time. Maybe there are certain things that you can kind of simultaneously do. And it's important to do that. Now, no, I'm not knocking, if you're 2 minutes. I had a rollover MVA and we were literally like 3 minutes from the hospital. by myself, I wasn't going to get much done. But I actually, because of the situation and the level 1 trauma, a supervisor was driving us in and my paramedic partner was in the back. So the two of us, time management wise, communicating with intention and doing things, we were actually be able to get almost everything done in, those 3 minutes. So don't have enough time. There are times where that's literally true, but there are other times where you need to do things with intention. You need to move with purpose.
Well, in general in life, not just with patient care, you make time for what's a priority to you. Period. If you want something bad enough, you will make time for it. Whether it's reading 10 pages a day of a book, whether it's listening to a podcast, whether it's doing push-ups and sit-ups before taking a shower in the morning, whatever it is.
Don't do push-ups and sit-ups in the shower.
Right. Before the shower. Because after could be kind of slippery too. But point being, you have time for what you prioritize, whether it's in your personal life, your relationships, your health, your eating, your exercise, all of it. You make the time for what you want. And this is why we, harped in the very beginning about desires. What you desire is inevitably going to affect the cause and effect in your life. And, when it comes to time management specifically, this is something that we're, as EMS, we're very good at, or we can be very good at on calls, because we're pretty good overall, I'd say, at maintaining our priorities. Well, okay. If you're being intentional, you're going to be able to look at a scene and be like, okay, here's there's 20 things I need to do, but here's the next 3 things I absolutely have to do. And you will figure out a way to make that happen.
Well, and desires and priorities are going to change. So like let's take personal, for example. I was on a shift yesterday and there was a ton of stuff. I think out of the 12 hours I was doing something for like 10 and a half, 11 hours of those. Like there was constantly something. And in that last like hour of shift, when I finally got to sit down, it's like, okay, well, I want to look over podcast notes. I really need to read. I haven't gotten to read any today. I need to do this, this, and this. But, I had a ton of desires and I was also feeling tired and wanted a nap and all the things. And it came down to changing priority. I decided to not take a nap, but just kind of lay my head back and rest because I was so mentally overstimulated. At that point, if I had read something, I probably wasn't going to retain. And this advice was given to me in paramedic school, for example, and now I pass it on to any of my students because it was kind of a come to Jesus. I was trying to balance so much stuff throughout paramedic school. And I had all these desires and wants and good intentions to do stuff. But because I was trying to commit to everything without a priority list, I was putting like sleep and other stuff on the back burner, which was actually making me drop the ball on a fuck ton of stuff. It wasn't working. And one of my instructors kind of took me to the side one day. I'd gotten like literally 6 hours of sleep in like 5 days. Like I was not in a good position.
Every paramedic student can relate to that statement. We have all been there.
Yeah, like it was not a good situation. And like I didn't do well on a test and, he kind of talked to me. He's like, "What's going on?" And I explained, not as an excuse, but just like this is everything I'm trying to achieve. And basically it came down to you have to prioritize. And ironically, like my health, he was talking to me, your health is something that actually needs to be on the higher priority. Because if you are so sleep deprived and you're not sleeping, taking naps, getting full 8 hours of sleep at night, whatever, you are not going to retain what you're studying, which means, losing all of that sleep and studying is basically, it's basically worthless. You're studying all these hours and not sleeping and not retaining.
Well,
Sorry.
Well, on the topic of sleep, I think we're all familiar with the name Jeff Bezos. He's the guy who created Amazon. And we all know Amazon's one of the most successful companies in the world. Well, when he's asked about what makes him so successful, he literally says, I prioritize sleep. I think better, I have more energy, my mood is better. So, I mean, kind of like what you're saying, it's very easy for us to get caught up in the nitty gritties, like, I gotta do this and this and this and this and this and this and this, but we forget that at a baseline, we have needs that need to be met before we can be effective at those other things.
And prioritizing those desires. So, like yesterday, I had desires and a need to do 50 things. And yes, I felt pressed for time because it takes time to read and go over show notes and what there was something else that I had to do yesterday and everything. Like, yes, I literally didn't have enough time to do all three of them. So then it comes to prioritizing. But ultimately, I had to prioritize my mental health first because I was not in a good, like, mental state to retain. So you have to find those balances. You have to have good intentions. You have to have a good mindset, prioritize, and time management. And honestly, if you're somebody that is as ADD as we are, like, I think Daniel has a personal calendar. I have a personal calendar. We have like a family joint calendar. Like, we write down fucking everything, or we would not know where to start. Talking about intentions and, for example, to-do lists. There are times where I'll call, text, or, in person talk to Daniel and be like, I have 50 million things I have to do and I don't know what to do. And the first thing out of his mouth is, write it down. I'm like, but the list is in my head.
It irritates you so much.
It really does, because I'm like, the list is in my fucking head. Writing it down is not going to change the, like, need.
Yes, it will.
No, it won't.
It'll make it better and easier to deal with.
He just likes the satisfaction of crossing them off of a list.
I mean, yes, it is very satisfying.
But, if you're somebody that is having struggles with that, then you can literally number them and prioritize them and maybe assign them to a day to help break them down and manage your time. But it's so important how you go into things, in the professional and clinical like standpoint of time management and, doing things with intention. The biggest thing, which we've actually seen with some students recently, is show up to work on time. Show up to ride times on time, show up to capstone on time. Like, that at a baseline is something that is not only expected with your job, but, like, if you get there on time, and Daniel and I actually like to get to work a little bit early, not because, we love work
it's
that
a compulsion.
much. It's a compulsion. And it's not because, oh my God, I love work, I just want to live there. We like to get to work. I prefer at least 30 minutes. I don't know kind of what your routine is. I like, roughly 30 minutes before work, even if I'm not clocking in quite yet, because I'll set my stuff down. I'll get, refill on water or whatever that I need, and I will literally just kind of settle in. So when it's time to start shift and check off the truck and all the things, I'm settled in and can go in calmly. I keep wanting to say systemically, but it's systematically, and be able to prioritize what I need to do and be settled. Just be in a better state of mind for the shift. You also have to be able to adapt to the needs of each call. Going to a call, whatever the patient disposition is, I go in already thinking, okay, if it's this kind of call, these are considerations I have. But how many times have you been dispatched to a call where, my favorite example is, because I have the worst luck when it comes to fall calls, I'll be called out to, like, the most basic. There was one time I was called out to a 5-year-old that fell at ground level with no significant injuries to any, major areas. Literally the most basic call notes you can imagine. So, I'm like, okay, well, maybe the parents are nervous, maybe she did bump her head, but she's crying. Like, this sounds very basic. When we pull up on scene and first words out of mom's mouth are, okay, we got her out of the water and she's not blue anymore. And I'm like, what the fuck? So you have to be able to adapt to the needs of the call. In that case, prioritize and time management, what the fuck I need to handle first, and adapt to the call. You have to manage your priorities. And as we all know, what dispatch says and what you find is not always accurate.
Which is not always their fault, because you do have people that just don't relay information appropriately.
I mean, yes.
But it's funny talking about showing up to work on time. You'll have nightmares and stuff about, pretty horrific stuff, and, you'll wake up panicked, about it. We all, that's pretty normal for people to just, have scary nightmares, whatever. Mm-hmm. I have nightmares about being late for work.
Literally, he does.
Like seriously, like the entire dream, I'll be like 4 hours late in my dream. I'll still, I'm 4 hours late and I'm still trying to get to work. And I'll literally be like on a spaceship going to the moon and still be like, well, I need to be able to get back in time for work. Like,
Even though
it's a
there's
little
only
psychotic.
even though there's only 30 minutes left to ship. By God, he's going to get to work.
So, not saying you need to obsess over it and have nightmares about it, but the little things you do, showing up for work on time, show up for, training clinicals on time, that's important. And it's those little things where if it's a priority to you, you will make the time. Multiple times we've mentioned, here the cause and effect relationship in life. A couple years ago, I started, because I was not terribly thrilled with my financial situation at the time and just where I was in life. I started saying, okay, well, what are the people who are doing well in life doing? And so I started digging into that. I started listening to people, or just investigating people like Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, people that have nothing to do with EMS. But I started to look and say, okay, these are hyper successful people. What are they doing differently? What are they doing in their life that I can adapt to mine? No, I don't want to create the next Facebook. I might like to create the next Epic, but that's a different story. But I don't want that big of a pie. I don't want to be depositioned in front of Congress like Zuckerberg has been. But I want to do better in my life. And the thing I found, the more books I've read on every topic, leadership, entrepreneurship, personal improvement, all of it. After a while, even though there's nuances, everybody says the same damn thing. And one of the things that is one of the most common threads to everybody who's been successful in life in any way, shape, or form, not just multimillionaires, but people who are bodybuilders, people who are physicians, who are excellent clinicians, all of it. Every single one of them will tell you how important intentionality is, how important time management is, how important your personal wellness is. You really don't, not anymore, you really don't see a lot of hyper successful people that are uber unhealthy. You just don't. Like, because they make the connection in life. I do X, then I see improvement in Y. I make changes here, I see improvement here.
Well, and I will say something that we have discussed in other podcasts. If you haven't listened, it might be good to go back and listen. With your intentions and desires, you need to make sure that your ego is in check. Because if your ego and, possible cognitive dissonance and everything are running wild and rampant and it turns into a dick measuring contest, then that is going to skew, alter, turn negative, pick any of those words, is going to affect, wow, I really can't find the words today. It's going to affect your intentions. So maybe let's talk about leadership, for example. I know we keep going back to it, but it's important. Your intentions of becoming a leader are so important. If you are wanting to take a supervisor position because your intention is, I've been here, I deserve it, oh, I'm better than this person, and all these honestly just negative and kind of selfish things, those are your intentions and your driving factors, then it's probably not going to go well. You're probably not going to be the best leader. There's already a selfish negative like connotation to it. But if your intention in general is I want to do better, looking at the current or the past leadership and not, shitting on current or past leaders, but just in general, like, hey, this leader did this great and this one did this great. And, I kind of want to morph it into my own thing and I want to make things better for my people. And, I would love to be able to, I don't know, make improvements. Just, it depends on your intention for doing it. Then it's going to end up going better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's what the reason that you have internally for doing something is
In
going to bleed out into what you do.
intrinsic desires.
What you want deep down, what you feel, what you want is ultimately going to be visible to everybody else. Even if you're not expressing it, you're not saying it, it comes out in your intentionality. You could say that you take this job seriously, that, if you're in medic school, you want to be a paramedic, but you're not showing any intentionality for how you study, how you improve, how you perform on ride times or whatever. If you're not making that intentionality, then if you're not embracing that kind of intentionality, then your words are just going to condemn you and no one's going to respect you. So this is where authenticity and intentionality go hand in hand. And that if you want something, if you really want something, it will bleed out into what you do. Period. The end. You can't get away from it. The whole point of this episode, I know it's touched on a lot of things that we've kind of already talked about, but again, we're wanting to see, our intention with the show is to infuse these gradual improvements into the culture. And yes, there's going to be things that we repeat. There's going to be things that we go over and over again. And the point is not because, we're bored or don't have anything else to say, but it's because we want to positively reinforce these things.
Well, and it's all connected. I mean, it's all circular, which is why we, mention it again.
Right. And what we hope that you guys take away from this episode is that you start looking at the little things. You start looking at the little things in your life that you can control, that you do have influence over. Take action on those things. Because there are things you don't have any control over. You don't have direct control over the economy. You don't have direct control over medical issues that pop up in your family unexpectedly, deaths in the family, all what have you. Your child gets hurt. Okay, you have zero control over those things, and all of us need to learn to adapt accordingly to those things. But there are so many things that are in our control that we just don't think about, or we don't care enough to think about. I know I didn't care enough to think about a lot of these things. It's taken me the last couple of years in my life to really get that connection, that causality in life, and to not look at myself as just being tossed around whatever, but to actually take responsibility for where I want to be, not just as a paramedic, but in life in general. So, to wrap it up, if we want to get better as an industry, if we want to become better providers, our mindset needs to shift, our intentions need to shift, because if we don't, then it's not going to be authentic. Any change that anybody can make wouldn't be authentic if we're not ready to receive it. So, take the time to analyze your life, what you can do better, what you can control. Even if it's something little, grab onto it. There's a wonderful, wonderful book that I've read that we're both, rereading. It's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. He so beautifully connects all of the psychology, practicality, everything of habit formation, habit building, and reinforcement. I would strongly recommend everyone to read it, underline stuff, make notes, think through it, and find ways to apply that to your life.
As we put out there in one of our Facebook posts, that's our March, basically book theme, whatever wording you want to go with. We've addressed the book podcast and stuff like that in previous episodes. But that's the one that we're kind of focusing on this month, and strongly suggest it. We've gotten some feedback that some of it is kind of technical and was kind of hard to retain. So maybe only read, a couple pages at a time, just so you don't get overwhelmed. There's a couple other books later in the year. There's one book in particular that's very technical, and my best suggestion is take it just a few pages at a time to absorb it. Like Daniel said, highlight, underline, take notes. What I don't like highlighting and taking notes within my book, but that's just me. Dog earring should be a crime.
We'll just agree to disagree on that. So anyway, as we're wrapping up today, we hope that you have found some value in this. We've tried to make it as practical as we can. We hope that this continues to create some conversations, both at work, at home, in your own brain. If you're like me, sometimes your voices like to have conversations together, and that's okay. There's no need to medicate that if they're good conversations. But we hope that you have learned something, that you've been encouraged, that you've been offended. We want people to think, because that's the only way we're going to grow and change. And we hope that you continue to spread the word, tell your friends, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
The ParamedicAF show is property of the EMS 2.0 project. The beliefs, opinions, and practices discussed in the show are our own and do not represent our respective employers. Please follow your local protocols, policies, and procedures at all times. All listeners are encouraged to research and self-educate regarding all content represented in this show. For more information regarding EMS 2.0, please visit our Facebook page for our website and social media links. Thank you for your continued support, and we look forward to you joining us next time.